and welcome. It's Chris from Christopher Hole Training. Welcome to this week's tutorial. Our topic is 10 important core muscles. So to start with, that's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to look at where are those 10 core muscles, and then we're going to focus on how they work. So essentially, we're looking at 3 different points. We're looking at where the core is. That's going to give us our building block. We're then going to talk about the 10 muscles, and then we're going to talk about how they work. What that then would lead on to is core exercises, what are good ones, what are bad ones, and how we go about doing those core exercises. But that's not for this tutorial. I've done tutorials in the past regarding that. The 8 best core exercises is one of them. So if you want to look at that one and watch that tutorial, then you'll find out what exercises fit with regards to being good core exercises that fit with what I'm talking about today. But before we get into that, just a quick bit of business. Just quickly talk about social media. So I'm on Twitter, which is at Christopher Hole, on Facebook, Christopher Hole Training, and on Instagram, Christopher Hole. So if you want to come along, please do like and follow. I'm sharing blogs, tutorials, all on exercise, nutrition, habits, behavior, so on and so forth. So if you want to come along to any of those, please do, and you'll be able to learn much more about health and fitness. Alternative, if you want to come to the website, which is christopherholetraining.com, you can follow this link. It's in the description below. You'll go straight to a page where you're able to enter your name and email address and download a 14-day micro workout, which includes the 4 best core exercises. What you'll also get is 2 follow-up videos with that, and you get some additional exercises and stretches which you'll be able to do off the back of that to, in a sense, complete the 14-day micro workout into a little bit more of a complete a workout. So if that's something that you're interested in, please just go straight along to there and get those downloaded. So what we're going to be talking about first is where is the core and what are the muscles. Before we get into the muscles, first of all, where is the core? Now, the core is basically from the ball and socket joints of your shoulders to the ball and socket joints of your pelvis. So what we're talking about here is essentially that's where the ball and socket joint is for the pelvis, in there, and that's where the ball and socket joint is for the shoulder. So essentially this whole unit here is your core. Now a lot of people talk about it as maybe just this little bit here, but what we'll talk about in a second is we know that that is just part of the core. So now that we understand that the core basically goes from the whole, that is the whole of your torso, we can now start talking about what muscles there are. Now there are more muscles than this, but these are 10 important ones. Now we all know the abdominals. So you've got rectus abdominis in the middle here. This is essentially the 6-pack muscle. So that's the one we understand. Then you've got external and internal obliques. So the external obliques are the ones on the outside here. Internal obliques, you could say, is one layer deeper. So this would be described as superficial, and this might be described as deeper. So that would be a superficial core muscle, that would be a superficial core muscle, that would be a deeper core muscle, and this would also be a deeper core muscle. The TVA, or transverse abdominis. Now, the transverse abdominis sits basically it goes all the way from your spine and then loops around your whole torso and comes back round. So you could say it's a bit like a corset. What we then get is the QL, another deep core muscle, which basically goes from your pelvis, up your lumbar spine, across the bottom of your ribs, and down, and you've got one of these each side. So you've got abdominals, internal, external obliques. You've got the TVA, which is probably the deepest one, and then you've got QL. You've got the erector spinae group, which basically go all the way up the length of your spine. Now there's a variety of muscles that go up the length of the spine. So that would be, you've got the erector spinae group, and then you've got the multifidus as well. What you've also got, a Latissimus dorsi. Now this is generally seen as a moving muscle because it helps move the arm. But what a lot of people don't realise is it's a massive spine stabilising muscle. Certainly the fibers that are further down the back in this sort of area, because you can't really see it because I've drawn over it, but basically it goes from the lower part of your back all the way up through the middle part of your back and then joins in at the back of your arm here. So you've got Latissimus dorsi, you've then got traps, which is this big kite-looking muscle, which again you might not be able to see too well because of my drawing. And then that covers, again, sort of that middle to upper portion of the back. And then finally, you've got the glutes down here. So the big glute muscles. You've got glute max on the back, which you can see. And then you've got glute medius. So you've got max. You've got medius. And then you've got minimus. Excuse my writing. So you've got, those are the 10 muscles. Those are 10 important muscles that we need to think about when we're doing our exercise. Now, what we're going to talk about in the next slide is how they work. Because a lot of people think, and we need to do one exercise for abdominals, one exercise for our obliques, one exercise for our rectus spinae group, one exercise for our lats, one exercise for our traps, and one exercise for our glutes. Now, some of these muscles will require one exercise. But what we can do is we can combine a lot of these muscles into single exercises, because when we talk about core exercises, we're talking about trying to get all these muscles working together, and you can include the glutes in that as well. So we're not talking about 10 individual exercises. We're talking about doing exercises that we can do that combine all of these muscles. Now, you might think, well, how do we combine 10 exercises together? It's quite simple. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next slide, which is how they work. I just want to add a couple of building blocks before I get into some more specifics about how they work. And that is essentially, as I've mentioned before, there are layers from superficial to deep. So if you can imagine a multi-story car park, this is sort of how I describe it. So it's not just one layer of muscles, another layer of muscles, and another layer of muscles. It doesn't necessarily work like that. What we have is you have one layer, but then what it starts to do is it goes out into another layer, and it goes out into another layer until you get out into the superficial muscles. So what you get is, rather than 3 layers, so 3 individual layers, 1, 2, and 3, you actually get one intertwined, interwoven system that goes from deep out into superficial. So what we're talking about is, what we now start to understand is how the core is starting to work. It's not working as 10 individual muscles or 12 individual muscles or whatever it might be. It's working as one unit. So that in some ways is how it works. Number one is it works as one unit. So that's the first thing that we need to understand. What we also find is the fibers crisscross. So if you were looking at the image on the last screen, or if you could imagine back to that, what you find is the abdominals, the fibers go in an up and down direction, like that. So if you can imagine the sort of 6-pack scenario, I'm just going to draw 4 for time's sake. What we then have is internal and external obliques, which are diagonal. The external obliques run in this sort of angle. So you can now start to see that they crisscross your torso. If we were then to turn around, you've got your lats that go in that direction and that direction. Erector spinae goes in that direction. Traps and rhomboids, or traps more so to start with, traps go in that direction. So you can start to see you've got fibers that are crisscrossing your torso. Now what this does, this is a bit similar to this interwoven from superficial to deep. So not only does it go from superficial to deep, it goes from, let's call it proximal, which is close to the midline, to distal, which is further away. So what it's trying to do is work like plywood, if you know what plywood is. Basically, fibres run in opposite directions. So one layer, fibres will run that way. The layer above it, they'll run that way. The layer above that, they'll run back that way. Layer above that, they'll run back that way. Now, what this is doing, this is increasing the strength of it. Because if it was just one muscle with fibres running in one direction, it wouldn't be as strong. But because they're layered in a lattice or crisscross, or another example is like carbon fibre, which is a very strong yet very flexible, and all of those fibres run in multiple different directions. So it's very haphazard. But what it does is that the way the fibres run give it that extra strength. So we're not just running in top to bottom, inside to outside. It runs all over the place to give it that extra strength. And then finally, the primary function is to prevent movement. And the example I'm going to use is lifting. So these muscles want to prevent movement of the spine as you lift. So as you can see, there's me here. So I'm currently bent over, like so. What I'm going to do when I lift this is I'm going to go into standing fully erect. Again, excuse my photo. I'll have my hands hanging down here, holding on to a dumbbell, like so. Get my fingers on there as well. So I'll be up, standing up straight. So this angle will go from, say, let's just call it 90 degrees. And then it will go to essentially up to 180 degrees. Now, the muscles that are moving are the big glute muscles here. So they're the ones that are making me lift up. But what's got to happen is all of these muscles that we've talked about, all these 10 muscles, so the abdominals on the front, the erector spinae on the back, the lats, the traps, the obliques on the side, the TVA and the QL in and around the lower spine. All of that has got to hold this torso as a solid unit. So I'm able to maintain my posture. So when my lifting muscles, which will be these glute muscles, when they contract and I start to lift this weight up, so as this weight starts to come up, what I don't want to do is as I lift, I don't want to be in that position where my back is bent and I'm lifting. That's the position I want to try and avoid. But I do want to try and keep my natural S-curve when I'm lifting. So as I start coming up straighter, this is the type of position that I want to be in, which is a much safer position when I'm lifting a weight up. So when it comes to the muscles, there's a lot of muscles working. They work as one unit. So we go from from deep, and then it goes out in a sort of in a spiral type effect to create that one unit from deep to superficial. What we then have is all the crisscrossing, which gives it the strength. So if I'm lifting a big heavy weight, I'm able to stay strong and maintain that position. And then finally, the primary function is to prevent movement. So when I lift this, all these 10 muscles are locking down to essentially hold my torso, or more importantly, my spine into position. So I can avoid this rounded position whilst I'm lifting a weight, which is a poor position to be in. So that's the 10 important core muscles that are helping you maintain position, giving you a healthy spine, giving you a strong core, giving you a stable core as well. So when we talk about the core muscles, we know what the 10 are. When we talk about how they work, we now have a better idea of how they work, which is essentially as one unit. So when we're lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, running, walking, whatever it might be, we need those muscles to start working as one unit. So if we were to then talk about exercises, we would then want those exercises to promote that one unit, rather than sit-ups, crunches, which are just promoting one muscle. So we talk about one unit. So when we move, lift, rotate, carry, push, pull, whatever it might be, whatever we're doing, we've got a core that is stable. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't be able to move our spine. We don't just move around like robots. That's not the point of this. But what we do need to understand is that that is how our core wants us to work. That is then the foundation that we can build on top of with all of our rotation of the spine and extension of the spine and in some degrees flexion of the spine. But those are more specific cases. If we're just talking about generally lifting, this is the position that we really want to be focusing on. So hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully it's given you a better idea of the core muscles, where they are and how they work. And hopefully it's giving you a better idea of when you're using it, what are the types of things that you need to be thinking about and what are the types of exercises that you can now be doing. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris and I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.